Hey, what's going on, you beautiful people? My name's Tie-Dye. I hope you guys had a pretty awesome day today. My day's been pretty awesome so far. So in today's video, we have a pretty long one. This is going to be a full-on tutorial on how to create a photorealistic license plate in both Maya and the Quixel suite. Now, this is going to be sort of an introductory tutorial for those of you who are just trying to learn the Quixel suite. If you have a bit more of an advanced knowledge on this texturing software, this probably isn't going to be the best video for you, but if you've used it for a couple projects or you've just purchased it, this is going to go through all of the different programs within it, including Ndo for your normal maps, Ddo for texturing, and it's also going to cover 3Do for actually rendering. So I'm going to actually just open up what we're going to be making here. It's pretty cool, actually. I'm really happy with it. It was the first real project I actually used this new piece of software for, and it turned out really good. So I made this custom license plate. It's a little bit run down, a little bit rusty, and we got the edge wear coming in, we got the sticker, and I was trying to make it as close to realistic as possible. As you can see, we got these bumps in the paint and the edge wear, and I think it turned out pretty nice overall. Everything from the bolts to the bump and all of that. And realistically, this model is pretty simple. Like, this is all normal map detail. A lot of it is not even implemented into the model itself. So before we dive into that though, there is one thing I quickly want to say. If you are watching this from a link on my Patreon, thank you so much for checking that out and donating. I really do appreciate that. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to see tutorials like this a little bit earlier before everyone else, I'll have a Patreon link in the description below. One of the early tiers is actually to get access to tutorials like these a little bit early, but if you don't want to do that, everything is still going to be uploaded to YouTube. There's nothing exclusive over there. It's just a quick way to, if you want to support me for some of this stuff, it's a great way to go ahead and do that, because these tutorials are pretty lengthy, they're pretty long, and they do take quite a bit of time to produce and upload to YouTube. So if you do want to support me in that way, feel free to check out the link in the description for that. But either way, guys, thank you so much for watching and supporting the video, and let's dive into the tutorial itself. So the first thing we're going to do is actually model the license plate. And if you're here just for the texturing aspect of this and you want to learn Quixel, I'll also have a link to this in the description, the model that we're about to make right now. But it is a pretty simple model if you do want to follow along. So the first thing we're going to do is import our image plane by going to View, Image Plane, and Import Image. And realistically, recording is probably going to slow this down by quite a bit, but let's just go ahead and open up our license plate. And now that it's in the side view, what I'm going to do here is just turn off my grids, just so it's a bit easier to work with, and I'm going to move this back a little bit. Alright. So, it's actually a pretty simple model to create. We're just going to create a polygon primitive cube, and we're just going to scale it to the correct size here. And extrude it so the edges are touching the edges, and the top is touching the top. And maybe a little bit more. So that's pretty good right there. And then it is a pretty thin object, so we're just going to scale this down by quite a bit. License plates are pretty thin. You know, realistically, this is still a little bit thicker than it really is, but for the sake of this model, I think it'll do just fine, just about that thick right there. So now what we're going to do is select all the edges. So we can just give them a nice little bit of a bevel, just to sort of match the shape of the actual thing. So I'm just selecting all of them by clicking this, holding shift, and double clicking the next one. And it's going to select all of our edges around. And from here, what we can do is click on this little icon here for our bevel tool. And I can just go down here, click bevel. And as you can see now, we got this interesting looking setup here. So if I hit spacebar and go back into our other view, I'm actually going to press Ctrl Z, just because it might be easier to actually set that up now in this view. So we're just going to mess around with both the fraction and the segments. So for the fraction, I want it to sort of cut off where it starts bending like it does here. And then I'm going to turn up the segments until it rounds out to the correct shape. So that's kind of looking like it right there. And overall, this is going to be a pretty high poly model, so don't be afraid to push the segments. I think I'm going to do 10 for this, because it really doesn't matter too much. This really isn't a modeling tutorial as much as just like getting things to look good in the texture. So maybe even, I'm going to crank it up to 11. I think that looks perfectly fine the way it is there. And the thickness is just about right as well. We will be adjusting that in a second. So what we're going to do now is go to our edge tool and select essentially all of the edges, because we do want to have a bit of a roundness to it. We don't want it to be perfectly sharp. So once again, we select all the edges, but I'm going to deselect the ring around. So holding Control and clicking one and then double clicking the one beside it, we're going to deselect all of the edges around the middle, just because we want the actual hard edges here that are connected to the front and the back face. And from here what we can do is hit bevel again. And once again we have it rounding. So I just want a bit of a rounding edge there. Something kind of subtle, and then I might just turn up the segments a little bit again. Just because we can. This really isn't a game model as much as just making textures look good. This is more of a practicing thing and a portfolio piece, more or less. But now we have some rounded edges, and the actual shape of the plate is pretty much already done there. So the next thing we got to do is cut out the holes for the plate. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually just going to select the background image, and then our front-facing viewport, I'm going to select this little icon just to isolate it, just for now at least, and we're going to import a cube again, and we're going to do something very similar to what we just did before. And I'm just going to move this into place. I'm going to try and get it to be the same size as what we have for this little hole here. I'm just going to go into our vertice tool just to get it exact. Just matching the edges up with the edges. Nothing too over the top here. It's going to be the exact same technique we used for the plate itself. Just like so. The thickness is actually perfect because we do want it to be cutting through. And once again, we're just going to select the surrounding edges. And then from there, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to hit bevel, and we're just going to try and round it out. As you can see in the bottom left, we're just going to try and mimic it to look just like that hole there. And by putting up the segments, we can easily just get that same shape there pretty quickly. That's exactly what we want right there. So that's pretty fast overall. But now we're just going to have to duplicate it and move it into the correct positions. So I'm just going to grab this, hit Control D, slide it over. And then with both of them selected, I'm going to hit Control D again and just bring them up to where they should be at the top. So now we have our 4 little license plate holes. And to do this next part, I'm actually just going to Shift select all of them and go to Mesh, Combine. So now they're all one object. So we have our license plate and our actual little cutouts. So from here, we're going to actually use these little hole shapes that we made to cut out of our mesh. So I am going to select the license plate and then press Shift and then select the whole second. And I go over to Mesh here and then Booleans and then Difference. And from here, as you can see, it cuts out from the license plate where we had the overlap, which is a super useful tool, but there are a couple problems with this. The first one, which is very obvious, is pretty much this entire thing is an n-gon. Like, this is a multi-side polygon, which we can't really use in a game, and UVing is going to be quite interesting as well. So we are going to have to fix that, but we will be getting to that in just a moment. The first thing I want to do is continue our little trend of beveling, because we don't really want any like super hard edges on this. So I'm actually going to bevel all of these edges on the inside of here. So let's just select our edges on the inside of here. It might actually be easier just to select all of that and deselect the ones we don't need. So by holding Control, clicking one, Control Shift, double clicking, or sorry, let's see, Control and then double clicking the one beside it, we can deselect the entire ring. We're just trying to get a selection of the ring around the edge that we're trying to bevel, which isn't too difficult. Holding Shift to select everything and then Control to deselect things, and then just deselecting the ring. And we can do the same with the top here. Holding Shift and then Control to deselect. And the final one, Control to deselect again. Let's see, I think I selected the wrong ones there. Yep. Alright, so now we have all that selected. We can hit bevel once again, just to get a bit of a groove on there, and something just very subtle, nothing too crazy at all. And I think that'll do it just there. So essentially that's the entire license plate shape already done. The one thing that we're going to have to do is fix up all the broken unused geometry. Like, we can't really use this the way it is simply because of how many edges there are per one face. It will kind of break it if we put it into an engine. So we are just going to fix that by going up to Mesh and Cleanup. And all we need to do is make sure we have, by Fix by Tessellation, just have faces with more than 4 sides and then hit Cleanup. And it's just going to sort of close up all of our faces that have more than 4 sides and sort of make everything into geometry that we can really work with. And that's essentially it. Now, I would never recommend this style of modeling for most situations. It's just that this is such a simple object and it's such a smooth face that it really doesn't matter too much. And that's the reason that I decided to go for this method, because we could have manually stitched it up. But I just wouldn't recommend it because it's just unneeded for this style of work. It's a bit too much, and for such a simple object, this is definitely a lot faster in the way to go. And just to make sure that things are going to stay smooth, what I'm going to do is hit edit mesh, or sorry, just edit with our mesh selected, and go to delete all by type and history, just to sort of keep things running a little bit faster for us here. Now, the only thing we have left to do as far as the modeling goes is actually just making these bolts here, which are super easy. It's not going to take too much time at all. So I'm just going to drop in a sphere. It's 20 by 20 right now, which is perfectly fine. And let's see. I'm actually going to go into our side view and just delete the bottom half of the faces. And I'm sure a lot of you guys can see where I'm going with this. And now we're just going to rotate it by 90 degrees. Let's see here. Yep. So just make sure it's exactly 90 degrees, or if you want it a little bit off, because this is a pretty rusty license plate, so it can afford to be a little bit different. And then what I'm going to do is actually smush this down a little bit, just to be a bit more of a bolt shape, because it's not really like a perfect cylinder by any means. And then scale it down, and let's just try and get it into place here. So I'm going to go into our skeleton view, just so I can get this directly on top of where it needs to be. At least as accurate as we can get based off of this image. And that's pretty spot on the way it is right there. Now we just got to move it into position. And that's pretty much it. Now I am actually going to edit this so it goes into the hole. So the way I'm going to do that is just by selecting this edge and extruding it by pressing Control E. And then just pulling that back. And sort of shrinking it to the point where I can get it through the hole, and then extruding it again with Control E and pulling that through. And then we're going to close it up by hitting Control E once again and extruding it to a final point. And we're just going to merge these vertices here just to keep it really simple. So I'm going to select the vertices and Shift double click all of them and go to Edit Mesh, or sorry, Edit Mesh, sorry, and merge, and there we go. Now it's all merged together. You can just adjust the values if it doesn't merge right away, but we still have some work to do on this. It isn't perfect by any means, so I'm just going to go to let's see, my edge selection tool, select this edge. It is a bit hard, so what I want to do is bevel that again, and maybe turn up the segment a little bit, and just adjust this stuff a little bit as well. This extrusion is a little bit back. I might want to pull that forward. And I guess I could even, I guess I could bevel that. It's not really needed, but just to keep the whole smoothness going, that actually looks a little bit nicer. And just push it back to its desired location. And then maybe even this is a bit long. We don't want it sticking out too much, just because we're not going to be focusing on the back of this all that much. So I'm just going to pull it in a little bit. And then, as you can see, everything's super smooth except for this part. So I'm just going to bevel this as well. Just a very subtle one. Bevels really do go a long way. So we're just going to do that, and that's pretty much it for the bolt. I'm actually going to select that and go to Mesh Display, Soften Edges for the entire thing. And it's going to smooth it out and look a little bit more natural. So this is a pretty high poly model, but it's still technically doable in a game. I wouldn't have it this high poly, but you could get away with it technically. It's a bit on the expensive side though. And then let's see, for the plate itself, we might as well just go to Mesh Display and soften all these edges as well. And that's looking pretty good. We don't have any real distortion. Sometimes when you do this extreme sort of auto connection will cause some visual disruption as far as the lighting goes, but it was looking pretty good here. But anyways, what we can do is now just duplicate this bolt over to the other side. And realistically, we can just put this wherever we want it to go, such as right about there. I like it with a little bit of the hole still showing, just so people understand that's what it's going through. And just sort of line it up exactly how we want it to be. And that's looking pretty good. So that's pretty much our model done right there. The next thing that we have to do is UV it, which is usually a pretty boring part, but it really isn't too bad for this kind of work. So we're just going to put on a checker material for everything here, and you can find these on Google Images. Just type in UV checker material. There's actually one built into Maya, as many of you guys know, by I'll show you how to do it. It's not going to be the one I'm using, but if you don't have another one, it works perfectly fine. So if you go to Assign Favorite Material and go to Lambert, and let's just scroll over to where that is. You can just go to where the color is in this little checker box and just assign the checker material right there. I'm not going to do that though. What I am going to do is assign a file. And let's go find my favorite checker material. I kind of use this one for UVing with everything just because it's super, super clear. I find it really easy to find exactly what I'm looking for. Let's see if I can find the correct file here. I really need to sort of sort this a little bit better. And let's see, this one. I just like this one a lot because the colors are very different and you can tell if something's distorted pretty easily, especially with the numbers on it. So I'm going to open that up. And let's see, I'm going to just sort of go to the Place 2D Texture 1 and just sort of make this repeat a bit more, just so it's more checkers per space on the actual model. This was a bit easier to visualize our UV job. And I'm going to turn on our texture pressing this little button here. And as you can see, our current UVs are terrible. This is how it's mapping our current image onto our object. So if we were to just sort of put on any random image, it would sort of be distorted like this image is here. So we got to fix that in our UVs, which is a pretty simple thing to do. But first, what I'm going to do is actually save this file, because you should always be saving while you're working. You never know if something's going to happen. So let's just save this scene as, go to the desktop, and I'm just going to call it tutorial. All right, so probably should have been doing that a bit earlier on into the video, but what the hell, better late than never, right? So I'm going to isolate the plate now, just so it's easier to work with. I'm going to go to UV and UV editor. And as you can see, currently, and I'm just going to turn off the texture by pressing this little mountain and sun picture. As you can see, it is pretty chaotic right now. We are going to have to go in and fix that, and I'm going to try and keep everything in one window here because I have multiple monitors that I usually use to do this. It makes it a lot easier, especially if you're watching a tutorial. But I'm going to try and keep this all in one window here for you guys to watch. So excuse me if I'm a bit slower at this than normal. But what I'm going to do now is sort of cut the plate into multiple pieces, just so it's easier to show off. The plate is actually pretty easy to UV. That's the least of my worries. So I'm going to go to UV and planar. And I'm going to planar UV it in the Z-axis. As you can see in our little axis display here in the bottom left, we can see that Z is going back in this direction. So if we project it in Z, it's going to sort of project it perfectly in our UV sheet here. So now what I'm going to do is sort of select the edges that I want to cut this by. So I'm just going to double click this edge here. I'm going to turn off textures just for this part so it's a bit easier. Double click this edge here just so we have something along the actual edge of it on the outside. But that's not quite enough. We also have to select edges on the inside of here to cut it, simply because that's just the way it works. If we cut it just by the outside, it's still attached here on the inside, so that's not going to do. So I'm just going to shift double click these inner parts and just make sure it's consistent. Make sure you're cutting the same ones here. It really doesn't matter too much, but it just that the consistency makes it go to that extra level there. Shift double clicking these all. And there we go. So now what we can do is turn on our textures again. And if we go to polygons, cut UV edges in our UV editor, we should now have two UV sheets. So this one is going to be representing the faces on the front, and this one is going to represent the faces on the back because that's where we cut it along. And as you can see, everything here is reversed. So because of so, I'm just going to have this shell selected, go to polygons, and flip, and it's going to flip it for us. If yours is flipping vertically, just make sure you go into the options by pressing this little box and making it go horizontal. So the only other thing we really have to do is stretch this out a little bit, just because the edges are not as perfect as they could be. We could technically leave it the way it is right now, but it's not exactly where we want it to be. But actually, before we do that, what I'm going to do is UV these centerpieces, because these are also UV'd the same way these are, and they're quite distorted because of so. Simply because it's easier to see these inside faces from the y-axis simply because they're facing up and down, so it's easier to do so. So I'm just going to select all of these on the inside. Let's see. These ones are good. I'm just going to select just pretty much the inner ones here, just the single row. So I'm going to select that ring by clicking, holding shift and double clicking the one beside it. And we're just going to do that for all of these. Shift is being held the entire time. And then holding shift once again, click and double click the one beside it. And holding shift again and double clicking the one beside it. Now that we have all of these rings selected, we can go to UV, planar, and Y this time. So we're projecting these from above, just so we get an easier way to see these. So technically there should be two right above each other here. And we'll get to these in a second. First, let's finish off these main plates simply by just stretching them out a little bit. So I'm going to select all the UVs here. Right click on this little Tetris looking piece right here. It kind of looks like a sideways lowercase t, but if you right click on that, we're going to end up in our unfold UV options. And if you don't get to here right away, there should be a second option at the top. Just click that and it'll take you to this window here. And I'm just going to select horizontal first and hit apply, and then vertical and hit apply. And what that's going to do is stretch it out just slightly for us to make it a little bit more optimal. And I'm going to do the same here. So horizontal, apply, vertical, apply. And if you're getting different results, just make sure you can copy some of my settings in here. And I'm sure you'll get the exact same results as I am. And now with that done, what we can do is deal with our little pieces here. So I'm just going to put that there for now. And with these pieces, what we can do is decide where we want our UV seam to be for these. I think for this example, it might be easiest just to have them on the top. So I'm just going to click on the edge at the very top right, simply because I feel like that's not a place a lot of people are going to be looking. It's going to be both covered by the bolt in the top, and on the bottom it's going to be an angle in which we can't see. So if there is a seam in our texture there, it really doesn't matter all that much. So let me just select those edges on those pieces, and then in the UV editor we can go to polygon, cut UV edges. And now if we select these and unfold horizontally, we will have perfect UV shells for the inside of there. It's not going to be distorted by too much, and then I can just sort of place these in a reasonable position. It really doesn't matter what order they are, simply because there's such a minute detail in the entire piece. As long as the actual size of these numbers are the same as these numbers, which they aren't right now. They're taking up too much UV space because that 8 and that 4 are different. So I'm just going to shrink this a little bit, and there we go. Everything's in sync once again. So now we got to do the bolts, which is a little bit less fun, simply because the plate is such a simple thing to do. But the bolts are a little bit more, I wouldn't say intense because it's still pretty easy, but it's just kind of tedious in a sense. So I'm going to isolate the bolt by pressing this little icon here with the bolt selected. And let's apply our checker texture to it. And as you can see, just like the other object, this is pretty incorrect as far as mapping textures goes. So let's just select the faces and sort of do this piece by piece in a sense. So I'm going to go into our side view actually, just so it's easier to do this. And let's just move this aside for a second. Where is our bolt? Do I have this isolated? Oh, no, I don't. Here we go. So let's select this bolt and isolate it. And the only reason I'm going to the side view for now is just so I can get a perfect selection of these front faces. There we go. So as you can see, I just selected the faces. Oh man. I just selected the faces on the front here. And the reason I wanted to do that was just because this is going to be one UV projection. I actually just want to make sure I got the right stuff here actually. Yeah, that's not bad. We can work with that for sure. So I just selected that, and now what I'm going to do is go to UV, planar, and we are going to project that in Z, just like we did with the license plate itself, because they're facing the same direction. And with this one, we can just do a simple selection of the UVs and just sort of unfold them, just like we did previously by right-clicking this little T and doing horizontal and vertical. And that's just going to straighten things out a little bit, and that's a pretty good job right there. So we're just going to keep that for now, and then once we get all the pieces in check, then we can sort of deal with the size of everything, the UV sheet and whatnot. So I'm going to isolate this once again. And now we're going to move on to the next pieces. I probably could have selected these, but I don't mind doing this in a separate piece. So I'm just going to select, let's see, I'm going to turn off texturing just because it's easier to select. I'm going to select everything in, say, in this ring here, and then I'll leave the rest to the back. And I'm just going to UV and planar it the same way we did before. But if I turn on my textures, I believe this will be, yep, it's backwards here just because it's facing the opposite direction as this. So before anything, I'm going to go to polygons and flip, just so everything's the correct orientation, as you can see by the numbers. And then, like everything else, we're just going to select the UVs and just unfold them with horizontal and then vertical. So we're going to leave this for now, and moving on to the next piece, we are going to select these faces here. And you guys may be thinking there are quite a few seams in this bolt, but you also have to keep in mind it's covered up quite a bit by the license plate, so this seam is never going to be seen. This one is probably not going to be seen as well, especially when we get to the texturing phase and you see there's going to be a lot of rust covering it anyways. So I'm just going to select up to about there, and I'm going to UV planar this one from Y actually, simply because we can then cut it from the bottom. So I select this, and then let's see here with the textures on. We're getting most of our distortion right around here. So what I can do is go edge, edge, and edge. How many edges did we have this go along? 1, 2, that seems to be it right there. So if we go to polygon, cut UV edges, and then select that and right click and unfold it horizontally, we should technically, if I turn my textures back on, have a perfect unfold there. I can also unfold it vertically just to straighten it out a little bit. And this one needs to be shrunk down by quite a bit just to sort of match the rest of the object here. So I'm just going to fit that there. And finally, we just have this last piece here. So we can just select all of the remaining polygons, which is going to be the end here. And once again, this is just going to be the same as the rest of pretty much everything. And we're going to do a Z axis. The numbers are in fact backwards here, so we can go to polygons and flip. And then for some reason it's upside down as well. So I'm just going to rotate that a bit. And once again, we're just going to unfold it. Now, for those of you who are just using a normal checker texture and are wondering how do you know if something's reversed, what you can do is actually click on, I believe it is this one with the blue square, and anything that is blue is in the correct orientation, and anything that is red is flipped. Just to check that, what I'm going to do is flip this one. And as you can see, now it's red, that is facing the wrong direction. So that's a useful tool that you can have. Most people just keep that on, but I just like having the numbers here. And you can also use this one here to see how distorted things are. So that's pretty useful as well. It's definitely not mandatory, but it's a nice little cool tip, tool, whatever you want to call it. And it definitely helps out quite a bit. So now I'm just going to shrink everything to the appropriate size in comparison on the UV sheet. And everything appears to be the right size. This is upside down, which really doesn't matter, but we're just going to flip it around anyways. So this is all the correct size here. I'm just going to get it into sort of an orientation that's easy to fit in. And now if we deselect it, oh, we're upside down, that's why. So everything is already the right side out. I'm just going to flip that. So as you can see, these numbers in the back are a lot bigger than these ones, which means these things are taking up too much UV space. So I'm going to shrink them down until we have about the same size on everything, like so. And I'm just going to move them up here off to the side. And since we have this bolt here already, we can either just duplicate this over and replace it or move the UVs itself. I'm just going to move the UVs by selecting our UV'd object, holding Shift, and then selecting this object. And then if we go over to Mesh, and where is it? Transfer Attributes. As long as we have Component selected and hit Transfer, it'll transfer our maps over there. And the way that we can check if it worked is we can just apply our checker texture. And as you can see, now it is UV'd. And the reason that is because it's the exact same object. So if we transfer the UV information from one to the other, it's just going to work. So I'm just going to select this UV shells and just move them out of the way so that when we merge everything, we can tell what is what. So with all of that selected, I'm just going to go to Mesh, Combine. I'm also going to delete our history just so it has less stuff to hold on to when we export it. So Edit and delete all by type, history, and I'm also going to save our file here just because. So that's our finished model. Everything's UV'd. We just got to put things into the correct spot in our UV sheet, which is pretty straightforward and pretty easy. We just want to maximize the space in our UV sheet here. So I'm going to have everything selected when I do this, just because if I'm resizing one thing, I want to resize everything to scale. So let's just try and pack this in as tight as possible. It's more or less just like a puzzle at this point. And these things aren't going to fit in with these at their maximum scale, so I will have to scale down our main shell by a little bit. I think something's going to have to be sacrificed, either the bolt size or the size of this. I might just come to a middle ground and shrink them both by a little bit. And let's see if we can fit these in here now. I don't think we can, or maybe we can actually. Yeah, that seems to be a perfect size actually. So let's just get all of these pieces within the boundaries. And there we go. That's pretty snug, but it's exactly what we want for a piece like this anyways. We are going to be making this 4K, so it's going to be pretty demanding on the computer, but it's going to give us a nice looking result as well. Feel free to do this in 2K or whatever you'd like, simply because the Quixel suite is pretty demanding, surprisingly. I think as a plugin it would be a little bit more relaxed in a sense, but it definitely likes to chug quite a bit. So since we have the available space, I'm just going to space these out a little bit just so they're easier to deal with when we get to the next part of the tutorial. So just give them some room to breathe. Alright, there we go. And that is essentially it. So what I want to do now is export a screenshot of this. So with our object selected, I'm going to go to Polygons and UV Snapshot. And this is going to come in really handy when we're texturing later on. I'm going to make it 4K, so 4096 by 4096. And the color, I'm actually going to make it just white. That's easy to work with. It's going to be a PNG. And I'm just going to export that to the desktop, and I'm going to call it UV layout. So that's going to help us quite a bit. So that is now exported to the desktop. And just to double check that, yep, we have it right here. So we can use this as sort of a guide for a lot of our texturing stuff in the future. So from here, I'm just going to go back in and export the model itself. File, export selection. Desktop, and we're just going to call this license. So that's that, and now we are going to have to bake a actual map for this. We're going to be baking out a just an AO map using a program called XNormal, which is a free to download program. It's super useful for baking maps. But the one thing I do want to do for this is actually explode our mesh a bit. And what I mean by this is pull out these bolts so they're not actually overlapping with the mesh and the license plate. And the reason we do this is because when you bake certain maps and things are that close together, it distorts the look of it. So I'm actually just going to grab these faces here. And just making sure I selected all the faces I wanted, because these are just the bolts here. And I'm just going to pull them forward. And we're going to export this as a separate mesh just called Exploded. And export selection. And Exploded. I don't even know if I spelt that right. Hopefully no one saw that. And I'm just going to hit Control Z to get those back in there. And pretty much that's it for our job in Maya. So I'm going to hit save. And with that being said, we're actually going to close Maya just because it's a pretty demanding piece of software to be using in the background when we're not doing anything. And that's pretty much all we needed it for, was just creating that license plate itself. So we're closing that down now, and we're going to open up XNormals. And as you can see, we already have quite a few files from our reference to our UV layout, to our license, and our exploded license, and our tutorial. And let's open up XNormals now. And you'll see why we exploded the mesh in a second. And the reason I call it exploded is just because it's when you pull everything apart, and when you have a lot of objects, it really does look like it has exploded. So I'm just going to clear all of my previous meshes, and like I said earlier, the reason we do that is just so that there's no overlapping information when we do bake it out. So I'm going to drag it into both our high definition mesh and our low definition mesh. And for baking options, we just want an ambient occlusion map. We're going to set it to 4K, and we're going to bake it to the desktop here on the top. You can adjust some of these details. For example, there's a lot of things you can actually adjust in here. For a free-to-use program, this is a phenomenal tool, but I'm just going to leave it the way it is, and I'm actually going to fast forward this part because the baking will take quite a bit of time. So I'm just going to hit Generate Maps, and it's going to do its thing, and I will talk to you guys when it is done baking out our AO map. Alright everyone, so we are back. That bake took quite a bit of time, so hopefully you had a nice little break watching YouTube videos or going on Twitter or doing whatever. I probably could have afforded to bake this in 2K resolution, simply because a lot of this AO information is very subtle. As you can see, we're just sort of getting the actual holes in the license plate, and the screws is pretty much the only real information we are getting from this. But to be honest, it does go a long way, and we will see that once we get to the texturing phase. And by the way, speaking of texturing phase, welcome back everybody who just wanted to see the texturing phase of this. If you guys didn't want to see the model, like I said, there was a model link in the description below. But now we can finally dive into the normal map and the texturing phase. So I'm just going to close out of X normal and just move our bake over to our pile of files here, and we're going to open up the Quixel Suite 2.0, and it's going to open up Photoshop with it. And for those of you who are just sort of watching along to see what this actually is, it is a plugin for Photoshop, and is sort of like the alternative to Substance Painter and Substance Designer. It's very different. I would never say it's a replacement for that. I still would much rather use Substance over this, but this definitely has its huge benefits. Like for normal mapping and stuff, really good. Not to mention the renderer in this is phenomenal. If you want to render things in real time, like all of those images I showed you at the start here, were in real time. Like this was what it was actually outputting in the renderer. So this isn't pre-rendered or anything. This is real-time rendering, which is phenomenal. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by opening up Endu, because we have some normal map information that we are going to have to make for this. So I'm going to press Launch Endu Project Creator, and we're going to select our mesh that we made. So on the desktop, we named that one License. So we're going to open that up, and it's set to a 4K resolution, and it's going to save to the desktop, which is exactly what we want it to do. And we're going to create the new project. So it's going to do its thing, and essentially here we have it. Now, what's cool about this is now we have our little normal map folder here, and I'm actually just going to drop this down for a second, and I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call this one Color ID, and this will make sense later on. So I would just suggest following along if you're not exactly sure what this is for, and I'm just going to sort of put that there, and once again open up the normal. But there's one more thing we do have to do, and that is bring in our UV layout that we made earlier, just so we know exactly where we're actually placing everything. And I'm just going to put that at the top there and keep it up there. And it might actually be easier if I rasterize this layer and make it black, just because it's so hard to focus on what's going on. Yeah, it's definitely a lot easier to see what's going on here. And one cool thing that we can do here is we can press this little 3 here for 3Do, which is a different program. This is actually how we're going to be viewing our 3D mesh in real time, and it's going to open this up. It is going to take a second, but it's just going to sort of be something that we can sort of use to view it. And for those of you who have never used it, it's the sort of same navigation tools as Maya. So holding Alt and left click is going to sort of rotate. Holding Alt and middle mouse is going to pan, and holding Alt and right click is going to zoom in and out. And you can use Shift and right click to sort of pan around the light if you'd like to. The reason it's showing this is because we have our we have our wireframe in our actual Photoshop scene right at the top there. We just imported that, so it will go away in a second. But what I'm going to do here is just going to set up our lighting. I'm going to put it to the Unreal one at the very bottom or at the very end, and turn our headlight on. And that way we just sort of get a very clear light of everything all the way around. But I'm going to move this to the other monitor just because we really do not need it right now. What we do need though is our reference images, which is on the desktop here. So what are we going to do to make this license plate come to life? Well, first of all, what we're going to have to do is sort of make this bezel. As you can see, we have this sort of little punch out all the way around the license plate. And that's not going to be too hard to make whatsoever. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to go to our tool shapes and hold that down and find a rounded rectangle tool. And for our radius, we're going to start off with 160. We're just going to try that out. And let's see here. I'm just going to drop down normal, and we're actually going to do it in the normal drop down here that it's made for us. So let's start off by trying to mimic this shape. And 160 looks like it's doing a pretty good job of that. And like I said, this program chugs quite a bit. Not to mention I'm rendering all on the same processor. So let's just see how this turns out. I'm dropping in this big shape, and I might be frozen for a second. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. I might have to close out some programs because I'm recording quite a bit of stuff. But okay, as I can see here, it didn't actually crash, which is nice. Hopefully it doesn't at any point during this recording. But from here, what I want to do is just resize it to sort of fit in the size of this license plate. So once again, referring back to our reference, it's just sort of going around the edge. And let's just try and mimic that as close as we can. It really doesn't have to be too perfect, simply because this is something that isn't perfect in a lot of license plates. It's just a random punch out, right? So that's not too bad. I'm gonna just save that there. So I want to hit the little check mark, and I'm actually going to duplicate that by pressing Control J on the layer. And I'm just going to turn this one off on the top, just so we have the one to see. And from here, what we're going to do with that layer selected is we're just going to hit this little button here, which is going to convert our shape into a normal, which is pretty useful. And as you can see, it's just preparing, it's finishing up, and it does a pretty spot on job. And then we can sort of adjust how we want it to look. So right now it's punching out a little bit, and just looking at our reference, we might want the size of it to be a little bit more. So I'm just going to punch up the size a little bit, and it's going to adjust and update that for us. And I might want the softness to be up a little bit. It's nothing too harsh. It's a pretty subtle adjustment. And then I can sort of change the curve as well. We can adjust all this stuff. It's really cool. I might just want it to be rounded a little bit. And what I'm going to do now is turn off our UV layout. And I'm going to hit this little refresh button. And this is going to force the refresh in our window over here. And as you can see, now we kind of have this bump around the edges that we just made. So now if I sort of adjust the light, as you can see, it sort of, let's see, I'm going to turn off the headlight. It sort of reacts to that in real time, and that's pretty spot on to what I want. I might just adjust the positioning of it a little bit, but overall, it's pretty spot on actually. I think I might just leave it the way it is. Actually, what I do want to do is move it a little bit. So with this layer selected, which is what we're adjusting, I'm just going to hit the little zip button. So it's going to make it easier for us to work with. It just sort of compresses all the files a little bit. And I'm going to zip that. And with that selected, I'm also going to select our duplicate, just because they're the exact same thing and I want to adjust them together. I'm going to hit Control T. And just, it was a little bit off on the side here, so I'm just going to scoot it over and hit check mark. And that's that part done. So I'm very happy with that. That's already the outside complete. And what we need to do now is the exact opposite, but on the bottom. So this is going to make perfect sense when you see this and why I duplicated this part. So with this one selected, we can just hit Control T, and it's already the correct size and all of that. So I can just bring that down, and let's just get it into position. We might actually have to scoot some things around here. It looks like this needs to be dragged over a little bit just to match it, but overall it's pretty much the exact same shape. And we're gonna hit the check mark, and then from here we're just gonna do the exact same thing. With this selected, we're gonna go over here and just convert that to a normal map. Except for this time, instead of being pushed out, it's going to be being pushed in. which is a super easy change that we can do. We're just going to change it from up to down in slant. So it's pushing in, and the only other things we really changed before was the size we brought up a little bit. So it's just going to increase the actual amount, and the softness we brought up a little bit as well. As well as the curve, we're just going to make it a little bit more smoother by doing half round. And then from there, what we can do is turn off our UV layout, hit the refresh button, and see how that turned out. And as you can see, it's a very similar shape, same size. And looking back in our viewport, now we have that pushed in on the opposite side. So it looks like, I'm just going to turn the headlight back on. It looks like we have something being pushed in and pushed through to the other side, even though it is technically the exact same geometry. It's just sort of like an optical illusion, just using light, and I guess the job done pretty well. So once again, I'm just going to move this off to the side while we do the rest of this. And there's not too much left to do before we get to the texturing. The texturing is a super fast and really fun part to do as well. So the next thing I want to do is the actual text itself, which is of course the main part of a license plate. It's what you look at. It's the whole reason you have the thing. And I'm just going to dive into our text tool. I'm going to use a font called License Plate. I honestly just searched the license plate font. It was the very first thing that popped up. Totally free, so you can use a variety of different fonts, whatever you want. But I thought this one was the most authentic, so I'm just going to go with that. And I'm just going to type in lesson for this one. And the font is quite small on this one, I guess. But we're going to blow that up and just sort of get it into position. And I'm just consistently looking at my reference. So if you don't have a second monitor, I'd recommend just putting it on your phone or something. But I'm just trying to see how big the text is compared to the positioning of the bolts. And this seems to be pretty on par with how that is. This seems to be in the center according to Photoshop, and I might even just scale it down a little bit. And maybe a little bit more. Yeah, so I'm going to go with that size. And once again, similar to what we did before, we're going to duplicate this as well, just so we can have it pushed in on the other side. And we're actually going to duplicate it a third time. Now this may seem weird, but we're just going to drop that into our color ID folder we made previously and just turn it off. And we're going to forget about that for a little bit, and we'll come back to it in a while. So I'm also going to turn off that secondary copy that we made previously and just focus on the one that we're going to be pushing out of the front. So with this selected, we are going to go over here and convert that to our normal. And there's a couple things we want to change. License plates really sort of pop out the shapes quite a bit. So I'm going to want to increase the size by quite a bit. Let's see here. Something kind of like that. And let's bring the softness up quite a bit as well. And we're going to mess with a bunch of stuff here. Bevel, I might want this to be like an emboss. Yeah, that's what we want it to be, a little bit wider like that. And the curve, just play around with it. I'm going to try a rounded slope and see if that gives us a look we're going for. It really didn't change too much. So maybe let's try, we want it to be very soft. So maybe perhaps even a cone? No, definitely not. It's not the look we're going for. This is definitely a lot of just mixing and matching and finding what looks good. I think a Gaussian might actually do it pretty well. Yep, I'm happy with that one for sure as far as that look goes. And softness I might turn down a little bit as well. In size, turn it up a little bit. And maybe a bit more. Okay, that's something I'm happy with there. And just to double check, I'm going to turn off this UV layout, refresh it in our viewport. And we're just going to take a quick look at how that turned out. So that's how it's looking right now. And I'm just going to turn off the headlight just so we can get that sort of light reflection. It's not too bad. I think the sizing is good. I think the positioning is good. And I think the actual depth of the lettering is pretty spot on. So I'm happy with that for now. We might come back to that later, but even if we don't, I'm pretty happy with that. And now what we're going to have to do is the same thing on the other side, but inverted because it's being punched in. So I'm going to bring this down, and we're just going to right click and flip horizontally. And it's already pretty centered. Let's see. Yep. So now we're just going to do the exact same thing with this selected. We're going to convert that over and make some very, very similar changes except for punched in. So we're going to change the slant to down, so it's being punched in. The bevel, once again, we're going to change that to, we had it on emboss, I believe. The curve, we had it set to Gaussian. And the size was punched up by quite a bit. Something similar to that. We're just trying to match it to the top there. Softness was up a little bit. And I might even turn the size down a little bit. Yep, I think that's looking good. And I'm going to force, well, first I'm going to zip it just so it's a bit of a smaller file size for us to deal with. And now I'm going to refresh this in our viewport. So now if we take a look, we have it punched in, which is looking pretty good. So that on its own is adding a lot of detail. And the only other detail we really have to add is now the little X's on the screws, which is really, it's not going to take too much time at all. So I'm putting back on the UV layout. And now we're going to do that with the screws. So I'm going to zoom in. And as you can see, this program just chugs. Well, it's probably just because we're doing 4K textures. Typically when I'm doing 2K in here, and I was messing around earlier, it really wasn't too bad. But for something like this, we're just trying to get the best look compared to the best performance. So I really don't mind at all. So I'm actually just going to use a circle tool, because if we look here, we kind of have these circles punching in. So we're going to do that first before we make the X's. So I just need to make sure we get the right size here. And it is taking its sweet time to load. So with that in now, we can just sort of position it just to the very center of here. And this is why normal or good UV maps are so important when doing normal mapping. Everything has to be super precise. So I'm just getting that in place there. And I'm going to hit the check mark. And with that ellipse selected, once again, just like the previous step, we're going to convert that to a normal map. And it's just finishing up there. And we actually want this one to be a little bit different than it is right now. So we do actually want it sticking out, because that's the correct look we're going for. If I reference back to these images that I made previously, we actually have it, actually I think we want it going in. We want it concaving in just a little bit. So I'm going to change this slant to down. And from there what we're going to do is I want the softness to be up quite a bit. And as well, the curve should probably be set to half round. And the bezel, we can change that back to emboss like we previously had. We just want it to be a very subtle, just sort of dip in. And I'm just going to check out how this turned out so far, especially with the size. The most important thing is just getting the size right with this, more or less. And bringing this back over. That's looking pretty much exactly how I want it to. Just a very, very subtle dip in. Nothing too crazy. And it's pretty phenomenal the kind of detail we can get just with these textures, right? I know it's 4K, but that saves us quite a few polys doing something like that. So I'm happy with that right there. And putting back our UVs, what I'm going to do is zip this. And it's taking its sweet time, of course. And I'm actually just going to duplicate this folder and just bring it up to the other screw. Now we just got to make sure that it's centered again, simply because I didn't align these perfectly in the UV sheet, which is totally fine because it's super easy to just sort of get it into the correct position. It is the exact same size though, which is really nice. So that's that right there. The only other thing now we have to do is add in these little hitches into the screws itself, and then we can move on to the color ID map and then the texturing phase finally. So we're definitely getting closer to the juicy part of this. This is probably going to be like a 2-hour tutorial now that I think about it. But for this part, what we're going to do is go to our rectangle tool and let's just draw out some X's. So I drew out a very, very simple rectangle. I'm going to hit Control J to duplicate that layer, and Control T, and I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees and hit the check mark. And with both layers selected, it's still loading actually. With both layers selected, I'm going to hit Control E and just merge them together into one layer. And it's still a shape layer, so we can still work with it. And what I'm going to do is hit Control T just so we can center it directly where we want it to be. Right in the middle of that screw there. Oh, wait a second, that's a little bit odd. Weird. Huh. Well, I guess we'll just deal with it as a normal map first and then we'll move it after. For some reason it was only moving one of the rectangles, even though they were merged. So that's okay, we can still work with this and then move it into place after we get it the way we want it to be. So with that selected, what we can do is convert that over to a normal. And it is taking its time, like I said. This is especially when it comes to the normal mapping, is pretty demanding. I feel like though once we get to the texturing phase, it won't be nearly as bad. I think it's just because the normal mapping in 4K uses up a lot of sources and materials from the computer. Because, for example, this is a computer with a 970, 16 gigs of RAM, 2 terabytes, an i7, but it's still taking quite a bit out of it. So hopefully we don't have a freeze here. Yeah, okay, yeah, it's just preparing it now. That being said, once again, always be saving your files. I know I'm not doing this for this specific example, which is pretty bad, but always be saving your stuff. And as you can see, now we have our little X here, which we can work with. Of course, as it is for a screwdriver to go into, we do want the slant to be down so that it's actually something that can be, pressed into. We do want the size to be a little bit smaller, I believe, so that we can actually see the bottom of it. The slant, I think the way it is actually pretty good, but the bevel, we could change that to emboss once again, just so it's a bit wider. And the size is good, depth is good. I might want to change the blend mode to overlay, just so it works better with the layer underneath of it. And then what I'm going to do is turn off the UV layout, and even though it's off center, I just want to see what it looks like, so I'm going to refresh the viewport and see if it's the right size and all of that stuff. So overall, that's pretty much the size I want it to be and the way I want it to look. So that's pretty good right there. So I'm just going to turn on the UV layout once again, and we're just going to zip this, and we're just going to reposition it, resize it. And actually not resize it, just reposition it and then move it over to the other one. And that's pretty good. I'm also going to rotate it a little bit, just so it looks like it's actually been used. Because it's never like a perfect up and down screw, right? So from there, I'm going to duplicate it, Control T, and we're just going to move this to the other one. And just like previously, it was a little bit off because I put the UV shell in a little bit of a different position. But I'm just going to rotate this so it's a bit off of how it looked previously. And if we force refresh, that should be it for our normal maps. Oh wait, I need to turn off the UV layout. My bad. So we have that X there, that one there, and that's pretty much our license plate as far as the normal maps go. So now we can get into the texturing. There is one thing we have to do before that called an ID map. And, oh, actually there is one more thing we do have to normal map. which is the sticker on the license plate. So this one's going to be super basic. It's going to take like 2 seconds. So I'm going to put back on our actual grid here that we can work with. And we're going to use a rounded rectangle. Now this is going to have a lot smaller of rounded corners, so I'm going to change this to maybe like a 20. I just want it to be a very subtle roundness. And the sticker sort of goes between the lettering and the groove here that we created. And it's not too big, so let's see. Maybe something like that will do for the sticker. And I just don't want it to be covered up by the screw or anything, so I might just move it over slightly and extend it a teensy bit. So I'm happy with that. And what we're going to do for this one actually is we're going to do it in a similar way that we did to the text. I'm actually going to duplicate this layer and put it in our little color ID folder that I talked about earlier. And we're just about to get to that after this, so you'll see why we did that. And I'm just going to turn off that layer just so we can work with the one in the normal map. And this is going to be a super simple normal that we're not going to have to do anything too crazy with. And let's just check out how we're going to do that. I'm just going to convert that by pressing the big button. And since it's just a sticker that we're working with here, it's going to be super simple. It's essentially just going to be the way it is, just with a tiny normal map on it. Like something like that. And if I hit refresh, well, we can check it out in the viewport now. And essentially we just have this tiny sticker on there, which is exactly where we want it to be. It's how it's supposed to look. And a sticker would still sort of have an edge on it, so that's why I normal mapped it, but it's super subtle. And that's just the way I want it to be. So from there, what we can do is we can close up our normal map stuff. That's pretty much it. We can actually export it if we want to, just by going to File, Export, and Save for Web, or whoever you export it in your version. And I'm just going to save it to the desktop and just call it normal. But now what we're going to do is adjust the color ID information. What this essentially is we create certain spots on our UV map that when you click it, you can instantly assign a material to. So that's why I copied over the text in the sticker, is because we can instantly copy a certain material to that exact spot on our UV sheet. For example, exactly where we want it to be could be the text on the license plate or the sticker on the license plate, but we're going to make it for a bunch of different stuff, including the screws and all that kind of stuff as well. So I'm going to close up our normal map little folder that I made for us, and I'm going to turn it off actually. And in our color ID, I'm going to open that up and see what we have to work with so far. I want to make a new layer, and I'm just going to put it in the background just for something to see. I'm just going to fill it up with white. And let's see what we got here. So I'm going to turn on our UV layout as well as our text here and our, oh, I guess I made this white, which is pretty inconvenient. This is our sticker as well. So those are the only two things we actually copied over. Let's see if I can just change it here to, let's say, a blue or something. There we go. So that's our sticker there. So this is going to be pretty easy to work with, and because we really don't have too much that we have to do here. So for our sticker, we're going to make it blue, but the sticker for us is going to be its own color. This for the lesson is going to be a separate color as well. The license plate is going to be a separate color, and the bolts are going to be a separate color. And then there's going to be certain text that we want separate colors as well. So for where it says lesson here, we're going to make this a red, just so it's easy to identify. But license plates usually have other text as well. If you saw in my example, let's see, I had 3D Designer and YouTube there. And I think I might just go ahead and do that exact same thing. So in our text tool, as long as it's the same color, it's going to be the same material. So I am just going to, once it starts loading again, just select where I want it to say whatever I want. I'm going to type in 3D Designer. And just blow that up to where I want it to be. Just in between the two little holes there. I might even shrink it down a little bit. And bring it up slightly. And of course, feel free to add text at the top there, like YouTube or something like that. I think for this example, I'm just going to leave it be. And we're going to start adjusting the colors on some of the other things as well. So let's see here. We're going to need a different color for the background of the actual license plate itself, because that's going to be a different color than the text and the sticker. So what I'm going to do for this is make a new layer right above the background. And for this color, I think we can probably go with, say, a green, just because it's going to stick out quite a bit. And we can easily just sort of go into our paintbrush tool and literally just paint this. Paint over all the polygons we want to be green. Or not green necessarily, but all the things that we want to be sort of considered the same material. Which is going to be our entire license plate. And you really got to make sure you get all of it. So maybe using like a shape tool would probably be a smarter idea. But for this example, it's pretty straightforward. It's a pretty, universal shape. It's not going to be too hard to sort of cover all of it, is what I'm trying to say here. And then also we want to get these parts because this is the inside of the license plate holes. And just making sure we got all of it. And then, of course, the bottom license plate, because it's also a license plate. We're just going to get that as well. Just coloring in the entire thing. Can kind of be a sloppy job as long as you're not covering any polygons that shouldn't be the same color, because this is something that's a little bit harder to reverse. You can import a secondary color ID map if you do mess up and you want to change it later on in the texturing process. But that being said, it's just, it's all around better just to sort of get it done once and never have to worry about it again. And I'm just going to be really careful around these edges here. So let's just get the main shape and then really be careful not to overlap anything here, while at the same time getting everything that you need to. So it is kind of delicate, but at the same time it's nothing too difficult to do. Alright, so we got the license plate covered in green, which is what we wanted. And now the bolts are all going to be their own color. So for the bolts, what we could probably do is a bright yellow. And of course with this, you want to have colors that are pretty different. You don't want to have things that are like too similar in a sense, simply because it's going to confuse the automation of the selection and whatnot. So try and use colors that are very, very varied, quite different from one another. And of course, if you're using plenty of different materials, it might be a little bit harder to do so. But as long as they're different enough, it shouldn't be too bad. And let's see here. That's all of that. The only thing we really have to do now is just the information on the sticker itself. So we're just going to use our text tool. And let's use a font that we haven't used before. For mine, I'm going to use one called Beveling, I believe is the correct way to pronounce that. And looking at a normal license plate, we just have the date, some random numbers, and the province. So we are going to start by selecting a color that we haven't used yet. In this case, we haven't really used like an orange. So that's going to stand out quite a bit. So it is currently April. And I'm just going to bring this to the top actually. And I think this font works pretty well. You can of course use any font that you want, but just for this specific example, this is what I'm going for. And then we're going to need the numbers as well. So I'm just going to click off and make another layer. And it is currently 2017. So I'm just going to hit 17. And we're going to scale this up quite a bit. And it wants us to have the numbers going down. So with that selected, we can sort of open up our information here. And actually what I'm just going to do is hit enter. It's going to make it a lot easier for us. Hit T. Bring this over here, shrink it down, and just sort of getting everything into the right position. And once again, we are going to make this part at the top the same color. I'm just going to say YouTube instead of like Ontario or something. But of course, feel free to write whatever you want. And it's pretty small, but we are using 4K, so it's pretty good actually. And then there's just a bunch of random numbers at the bottom, which I'm going to have as a separate color. For this one, we could probably use like a, I think like a burgundy would be different enough. And just some random numbers, like I'm just going to copy it from this license plate, which is, in this example, 2127781Z. Hopefully this license plate is like out of date or something, because I'm kind of just like copying everything on it. But yet again, this person's license plate was just randomly on Google Images, so probably not a good idea. So there's that. And I might have to recenter where it says YouTube, because it kind of seems off a little bit now that we have that text on the bottom. And that is essentially our color ID map right there. So with that, we can sort of dive into the texturing phase of things finally. I'm just going to turn off our outline there. I'm going to go to File, and we're going to export this now by going to Export, Save for Web, and I am just going to call this Color ID. We're going to hit save, and we're actually going to close out of Photoshop just to sort of get rid of all of this stuff. And save it. Yep. It's a pretty good idea to always save your stuff, as you guys all know. But now we have all of our stuff here, and I'm just going to add this to our pile of documents. As you can see, we've got quite a bit of stuff here now. But once again, we're going to open up the Quixel suite and keep this going. An hour and a half into the tutorial pretty much, and we are just now getting around to texturing. I guess a lot of it was waiting for that map to bake, but yeah, it really isn't too long to do this, and it does turn out really good. So now we're going to dive into this program called Dedo, and this is how we're actually going to be texturing. So we're going to open up our mesh that we made by going to a license. We want it to be in 4K, just like we had everything else previously. And let's see. We're going to drag this down and import the normal map that we made here as normal. And we're also going to import the AO map we baked earlier. And I know it was very subtle, but it does have a lot of really nice things that's going to add to it. And one of the very important things we do is we check for curvature. We want to click Bake in 3Do. And then the rest of this stuff is pretty much set up the way we want it to be. You can choose where you want to save it to. It's just going to be the desktop for me. And then we can hit Create. And what it's going to do now is prepare our file. It's going to create all of our maps. It's going to bake it all out, everything that we didn't do. For example, as you can see here, it's baking out our curvature map. And while this is baking out, I'm just going to have a quick drink here. So it's just preparing everything, the masks, it's loading everything up, and the texturing phase is actually pretty simple. You're going to see why we take a lot of time to prepare things such as ID maps and normal maps outside of the actual texturing phase, because once we get into the texturing, it is super fast. So I'm actually just going to open up 3Do once again so we can see what we're doing here, and I'm just going to keep it front and center and keep it as something that we're looking at the entire time, simply because it's just the way we're going to be working here. I'm actually going to set up some post-processing information here. So I'm going to make this in full screen. And I'm going to drop down our post-processing. We're going to adjust a couple things. Force high quality viewport, sharpness pre-pass, we're going to turn that on and maybe just adjust it to something we like. Screen space ambient occlusion, we're going to turn that on. Intensity, radius, just sort of adjust it so you end up with something you like. It's just going to add some darkness around the bolts more or less. If you want to, you can press visualize and it'll show you where it's adding the darkness, and it's pretty much, yeah, just where the bolts are. So we're going to turn that off. Physical lens simulation, we'll keep that on for now. And then there's just a bunch of different stuff like flares and whatnot that you can adjust, but I kind of like having optical vignetting, just sort of to add some darkness around the edges. But of course, this is all stuff we can change later on. It's just what I like to work with. And then we're going to use the Unreal lighting sample with a headlight on, just because I personally work with a lot of my models to put into the Unreal Engine, so I like seeing how it would turn out before I even have to do that. And then we're just going to make this smaller and we can start working on the textures. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over here, and we are going to add a smart material by pressing this first little button here. And this is just going to be the very base metal for our actual license plate. So in the search, we're going to type in metal and just hit enter there. The one thing I noticed about this program is the spelling has to be like spot on, or it will not pop up with anything. So we're just going to try and find like a super simple metal that we can have in the background. Just for where the edge wear is showing. So I guess near the top would probably be best. Metal plate. You really can't get any better than that, I suppose. So we're going to select metal plate and just create that. We might have to adjust a couple things simply because it might be a little bit different than what we want it to be like. So it's just creating what we want. And since we have that curvature map and all that information, it is going to do a pretty good job creating exactly what we want here. We are going to adjust the map in a couple of ways. We do just want it for kind of like the color and the shine. We don't want any of the normal information. But as you can see, this is what it looks like right now. It's just sort of like banged up metal, which is pretty good for what we want it to be. Oh, sorry, I accidentally pressed a number key. This is just a good example here, though. You can actually drop down the menu and see exactly what map you want. But anyways, for this, what I'm going to do is go over to where it says normal. And where it says texture intensity, I'm going to drop that pretty low. Maybe to like 3 or something. We don't need any of that normal information, simply because we're just using this layer as color for our background. We don't want the normal information to sort of bleed into our other textures since it is at the bottom. I'm going to hit this little arrow to go back. So now we have metal plate is at our very base. Now we're going to add a bump that you see on license plates. Most license plates, if I can open up the image here, as you can see, have this kind of bump to everything, to the text on top of everything, just because of the way it's painted. So we're going to add that bump right now. And I found that a great way to add a bump is using a material called grainy ABS. So we're going to once again add a smart material. And I'm just going to type in ABS. And we're going to find the grainy ABS. This is the one I previously used, and hit create. And we're going to do something similar. We're just going to use this for the normal information though. So we're going to turn off everything else pretty much. So we're going to let that load in. And it's taken a while, so we're just going to let that do its thing. But essentially it's going to change the entire texture. We're not going to even recognize that we had that on previously. So it's a completely different look, so we are going to have to change a couple things. We want the normal information to stay the same, but for the gloss tab, we're just going to click on that here. And we are going to turn the texture intensity down to about 0, because we don't want any of the information to sort of shine through. Specular, we're going to do the exact same thing. We want the texture on 0 because we don't want any of that information to sort of shine through. And albedo as well. We are going to want that information to be at 0. And the opacity also at 0. So at this point, maybe I did miss something here. Oh, my bad. The plastic, we need to sort of do it to both of them. The plastic opacity also has to be on 0. So now we just sort of have this grungy look. We do have to go back and make sure that everything is on 0 except for the normal information. So I just did the edgeware before, now we have to do it for plastic as well. So just turning the opacity down on everything. And by the end of it, we should just be left with just the bump. So now we have that metal and that bump, which is exactly what we're going for. We could probably turn down the bump intensity as well. So I'm going to normal, and under plastic base, and under texture intensity, I'm going to turn that down to maybe about half of what it is. Just so we have a very subtle bump, nothing too crazy. Maybe 30 is the lucky number here. I'm going to stick with about 30 for that. And now we can start going over top of it with very, very specific materials. So holding Shift and C, let's see, actually, going back. What we didn't do is we didn't actually import our ID map from previously. So let's see. This is a great example as to how to re-import input maps. So open the re-importer, which is the second button here. I can click that, and we can select ID map. It essentially just lets us re-import whatever maps that we want to once again. So if you do want to make changes, you still can't. I'm going to press OK to our material ID and hit render again. So now it's just going to go through and do what it did previously. I probably should have did this at the start. My bad, guys, but it really is a super quick fix. And actually with my previous license plate, I did re-import different maps. So it is a super useful thing. You probably will use it a couple times. And I guess this is a great opportunity to take a quick drink once again because my voice is getting kind of sore. And it'll just adjust it automatically to what you already had set up. So if you do want to change things, like what I did before was I changed the position of some of the text on my license plate. You can go ahead and do that, which is great because it's totally non-destructible. And that's what I like about this program. As you can tell, compared to Substance, it's very different. But the quality is top notch. So it really does depend on the exact sort of style that you are going for. And I can see myself using this program specifically a lot more for props rather than anything like a detailed object that has a lot of different text on it. That's when it's going to get a little bit more complicated. Anyways, we can open up 3D once again. And we should be updated and able to work with the color map that we made before. And you guys can now see, if you've never used them before, why exactly we made one in the first place. They come in super, super handy. And we're okay, back to where we were. Our lighting information is totally gone though, but I guess we don't really need the post-processing right now. I'm just going to set this up with the Unreal Engine and the headlight. And maybe even turn the headlight down a little bit. It's kind of intense. And so now what we can do, if we hold Shift and press C, we have our color map. And whatever we click on, we can assign a material directly to that color. So I'm going to click on the green. And now we can select whatever material we want to assign to wherever green was. In this case, I want scratched paint. So I'm just going to type that in. Scratched paint, and in this case, I think the one we're going to go with is scratched paint. Let's see. Just browsing for something that looks good. And number 10 seems to be pretty spot on for what we want. So we hit create. It's asking if we want this to be within the material. I'm going to select no because we want it to be separate from the material we're in right now. It's just going to take some time, and it's going to automatically project that painted metal with all the scratches on top of just where the green was, which is going to look really cool. And then we can adjust where the edgeware is, and it's going to give us a very, very nice result. So there we go. Now we have that sort of white paint, and as you can see, we still have that normal information underneath there, but we can change a lot of stuff about the scratched paint. So as you can see, we have a lot of edgeware here, right around the edges because of our curvature map. So what we can do is we can actually go into scratched metal, This is actually the metal underneath, so we don't actually even need this layer in the first place. So I'm going to select this, and I'm actually going to delete it, because we already have metal underneath that we made previously. So with that deleted, we should essentially be better off without that. Perhaps not. Let's see. That's kind of odd, actually. I'm surprised why it's not really going through, but I think for now it'll do. Actually, what I'm going to do is go back, and I'm going to move this layer up. Alright, so that didn't work exactly how I wanted it to, so we're actually going to delete that layer and restart that, just because of the way that the layers are interacting with one another, which is going to be a super quick fix. I'm really not too worried about that at all, but once again, we are just going to hold Shift, press C, and click on the green. We're going to type in scratched painted metal. Or just scratched painted like we did previously. And we're going to scroll down to the same material, which I believe is called scratched painted metal 10. And let's see if we can find it. I believe it's this one right here. Yep. All right. So what went wrong previously was it wasn't actually showing the layer underneath because it had a built-in metal underneath the paint. So we can actually just adjust the metal that was underneath the paint to sort of suit our needs in this case, which is perfectly fine. I was just a little bit confused as to why it was doing exactly what it was doing there. But either way, we're going to get the exact same results. So that's not a big deal whatsoever. So we're back to our paint. And if we want to, we can sort of turn down some of these scuffs. So for the painted metal underneath, I'm actually going to click on the gray here under the albedo. And I'm actually just going to bring up the color to a bit more of like a silvery. And we should be able to see that adjustment. Yep. So now we can sort of see the adjustment on the edge wear there. And we can also see it wherever there is edge wear around this. And that's exactly what we want it to look like. The paint itself is kind of like a very sort of pale white. I kind of want it to be a little bit brighter. So I'm just going to bring that up a little bit just so it's not as dull. Nothing too crazy. You never want anything to be too white. So that's kind of the look I'm going for there. The scuffs, I'm just going to turn that off to see what it looks like without any scuffs. And I'm going to turn it back on just so we can sort of see what we're working with here. And I think the current layout of the scuffs is pretty good. And then we have cavity dirt here, which I'm just going to leave it simply because it's not too apparent. But what we can do is we can go over to our mask for our paint. And this is where we can add some scratches to it. I'm going to hit yes so that we can sort of adjust the layer here. And it's going to just open up some of the masks that we can work with. So it is just opening everything up right now. It's probably going to be faster on your end simply because I have a lot of recording stuff going on right now. And my computer is going through quite a bit here. But what we want to do here is we're going to add on a sort of a paint scratch mask to it. So let's just sort of look through something. We can do sharp scratches, light edge scratches. I think I'm going to do light edge scratches because that sort of like tells you the story of it's sort of worn over time, more or less. And we can just click that and we're going to see how it looks. And obviously that's not the exact look we want to go for. In fact, it's kind of inverted. So I'm going to hit the little invert mask button. And now we can just sort of play with it a little bit. So I can turn the tightness up and we're just going to sort of mess around with it until we get some scratches that we like on here. So when I turn the tightness down, as you can see, we're starting to get scratches within here. I can turn the contrast up. And we're just going to play around with this for a little bit. In fact, I think I'm going to use the Sharp Scratches mask instead, because I think that's the one I used previously, and it turned out pretty nice. I was just kind of curious to see how the light edge scratches work. This is definitely a lot more the style I want to, and once again, we're going to invert the mask so that we mainly get the paint with some scratches missing. So this is what I'm, wow, this is what I'm going for in the first place. As you can see, we have these scratches here. And we can adjust this a little bit. We can turn the tightness down and get a couple more scratches in there if we want to. So it's getting a little bit more dirty there. If we turn the contrast up, it's going to make the lines a lot sharper and get rid of a lot of the smaller information. I think I kind of like it with the contrast up, but I'm going to turn the tightness down a bit and see if we can get a few more scratches in there. Maybe not that much. That's quite a lot of scratches that I don't think we quite need that many. It's just trying to find a perfect match, and maybe even a little bit less. And that's not bad the way that is right there. I think I'm going to stick with that. What I do want to do though is, as you can see, we do have this edge wear all the way around, and it's not quite natural to have that all the way around. So we are going to sort of paint back in some of the information, and the way that we're going to do that is by changing our sort of mask color here over to white, and when we do that, whenever we paint over something that is taken away, it's going to bring it back. And we can also change our brush here. I'm going to go over to a bit more of a grungy brush. If I can find that. Let's see. Grunge, here we go. It's going to load up some brushes that come with the program. Of course, you can use whatever brushes you want, but I'm just going to grab this brush here. And as you can see, maybe I'll just blow it up using the square bracket keys. You can make it bigger. But when I paint over it, it brings back some of the paint. And I think that looks a little bit more natural than just sort of having it all gone away. So in some places, it might be a good idea to bring back some of it, especially in the corners, because in real life, it's a bit harder for paint to sort of chip away in corners. So I might just bring back some paint there in the corners. And it really is just trying to mimic real life. This is where a lot of reference images come in really handy. And then, oh, accidentally hit a number on my keyboard. And just trying to get back some of the paint in the corners. It's okay if the bottom is kind of chipped away. Maybe with the occasional spot that has come back. And I'm just going to bring back just some information here. Not a whole lot, but just enough to make it look kind of believable. Like even just like that looks a little bit more natural now. The corners definitely, like I said before, are a place that you'd probably find the least amount of wear and tear, simply because it's the hardest to get to. And I think just like that, it sort of makes it a little bit more believable as to the nature of how it ended up losing its information. So I'm happy with that for the white paint, and we can move on to the next thing. I'm just going to hit accept mask here. And we're going to do a very, very similar thing for the text on the actual license plate itself. Now if we swing around, we can also see that it's going to automatically take care of some of this stuff. If you want to, you can go ahead and make that a little bit more natural. But I think it does a pretty good job on its own. Once again, sort of like erasing the edges, and maybe most of the back would probably be a good idea, simply because you're not going to get that many scratches on the back of the plate, unless you're like looking through a junkyard or something. I guess it totally depends on the situation. But once again, we're going to hit Shift and C and select now the red, and we're going to use a very, very similar texture. It's going to be painted scratched metal. So, oh, I typed that wrong. Scratched metal. I'm just going to type in scratch this time. Scratched paint metal. I believe the one I used previously for this was 04. Scratched painted metal 04. Of course, you can experiment and use whatever you want. There definitely is no like right answer for this. Maybe if I just type in 04, it'll narrow it down a little bit. Scratch paint in the middle, 01, 02, 03, 04. Here we go. No, I don't want to select it or put it into a already existing layer. Simply so it's easier to work with it this way. And it's just going to create that material for us right here. And we're definitely getting close to the end of this, which is nice. Like I said, once everything's set up after you make your normal information and your ID, it is super fast. It's just always thinking one step ahead when you're doing this kind of work. So now we have this. I'm going to change the color of the paint by simply being under the albedo tab and clicking on the blue. And we're just going to bring this up to a bit more of a lighter license plate blue. I guess license plates are different wherever you are. That's a little bit too bright actually. But they're kind of different wherever you are, I suppose. So yours might end up looking completely different than mine. But that's all right. This is just the way it looks in Ontario. We have this kind of like blue, very similar to this. It might even be a little bit darker than that. Kind of like this here. And what I'm going to do is going to go over to gloss, and I'm going to turn up the glossiness of the paint just by bringing the color up. And I'm going to do the same thing in specular. As we can see, it's pretty low for the paint, so I'm going to bring that up a little bit just so we have a bit of a shine to it. Nothing too crazy. I think that might be a bit too much. Maybe just below half. Alright, there we go. Pretty happy with that. So now we're going to go back to albedo, and we're going to adjust some of the things here. For example, the scratched metal, we want that to be lighter like we made it previously, which is just going to be around the edges here. That's a bit too bright. Maybe like this. Let's see. I think it's because we have some scuffs here. I think if we turn off the scuffs layer, which is causing this sort of weirdness. Yeah. So we are going to delete the scuffs layer simply because we do not need it. And then from here we can adjust the paint itself. So the paint is being chipped off quite early on. What I'm actually going to do for this is, let's see. I'm going to open up our mask here. So I'm going to open that up just by clicking on it, which is just to the left of the paint color itself. And as that loads up, I'm just going to explain, we're just going to sort of extend it a little bit simply because it's a very universal like chipping job all the way around every layer. And we're just going to change that a little bit just so it's not as uniform. And the way that we're going to do that is just sort of adjust some of this. So I might bring the contrast and the tightness up a bit. So I'm going to start by bringing up the tightness and see how that affects it. And then the contrast a little bit as well. And I'm just sort of keeping my eye on the edges here. So that definitely sort of brought it out a little bit. But the next thing I want to do is, let's see. I'm going to sort of want to bring the paint back in some areas. So I'm going to bring the brush back to white. And if I paint over certain areas, it's going to bring paint back. So I'm going to bring paint back in certain areas just so it's not so uniform all the way around as to where the paint is gone. And of course, this is all just personal preference. Wherever you think paint wouldn't, be eroded away, you should probably do that. Like for example, the inside of a shape, it probably wouldn't be gone. It could be scuffed, but it probably wouldn't be all gone. And this is where reference really, really comes in handy. But I can't imagine, like for any of these crevices, that a lot of paint would be gone. even if you just bring back some of it, it definitely goes a long way to add some of those realistic details. So we're just going to add in a little bit there as well. And these S's, since they are the exact same, they're going to be exact replicas of one another. So this is where you really have to go in and change things. Whenever you have two of the same letters, since it's auto-generated, it will be the exact same. So you're going to have to change some stuff there for sure. Unless you're going for that look, but for something like this, you probably wouldn't be, simply because it's supposed to be like a natural change. But we're just going to sort of change this up a little bit, make it a little bit different, and add some paint back where we think paint should be. Once again, auto-generated rust here, you can see it's the exact same on all of the little shapes here, simply because they're the exact same. Within the E, all of the little connectors are all the exact same. So that's sort of adding some realism back there. I'm going to accept the mask for that. And if you want to take chunks out, you can just change the mask color you're painting with to black, and it's just going to do the exact opposite. One of the things I am going to do, though, is sort of change the specular on the paint. I think it is too shiny now that I changed it. I'm going to bring that down. Now I'm starting to understand why it was a bit darker naturally now. I think that looks a lot better with it less shiny like that. I might even bring the specular on the license plate down a bit too, eventually. But I think for now it's kind of good. What I do want to do, though, is go back to the albedo and adjust the rust a little bit. So we're going to open up the mask for the rust and do a very similar thing. Just make sure nothing is too uniform on like the S's or the E's or anything where there's very similar parts. Because if things look the same, it starts looking very generated and you can tell. So of course we don't want that. We're going to want things to look a little bit different from one another, despite them being auto-generated. So let's start looking at where the rust actually is right now. We just have these corners. I actually want there to be a little bit more, so I don't want the tightness to be as dominant. So we're getting rust now on the shapes, which is nice. That's very realistic as far as things go. In contrast, if we turn that down, it'll probably explode it out a little bit more. Yep. So that's the look I'm trying to go for, but I also want to paint over that. So I'm going to have black on here as well, and sort of paint out some of the rust in these corners to be a little bit different. Now keep in mind, rust in corners is pretty natural. It's doing a good job of auto-generating that, because that's where you want it to be. I just don't want them to look so so uniform and exact. For example, this S and this S are the exact same, so I'm going to sort of get rid of the rust on one side here and let it exist here, just to keep it a little bit different, separate things a bit, and going through and brushing things up yourself definitely doesn't hurt at all. So it's going to make things look a little less generated. And I'm pretty satisfied with the rusty look on that now. That's not bad. So I'm going to accept that mask. And we're going to move on to the... I think we're going to move on to the bolts now. So we're going to go back by hitting this arrow here. And with Shift-C... Let's see here, actually. Shift-C. It's going to show everything we have left to do, which is just the sticker and the bolts. So the bolts are super straightforward, nothing too crazy. I'm just going to type in rust and see the options we get for rusty materials. So it might be worth looking into what these bolts are actually made of in real life. Rusty stained steel could be nice, but there's multiple versions of them. Whatever sort of looks realistic to you. I don't want anything too shiny. And I guess that depends on the style of rust you want. So let's just take a look at everything here. Old rusted cast iron, obviously not. Rusted steel 10. I think this one looks pretty good actually. 07. So I'm just going to hit create. And since we already have that normal map information in the curvature map, it's going to automatically put the rust where it should be. And then we can just go ahead and sort of adjust certain spots of that. So it's going to do a pretty good job, but of course I want to go in and adjust the mask, simply because if we zoom in, there really isn't too much rust whatsoever. And that's because it's very, very little on our mask here. So I'm just going to open up the mask. I'm not adjusting too many of these layers here. But as you can see, you're probably starting to get an understanding as to how a lot of this stuff works. A lot of this is very, very similar. And as long as you're prepping things earlier before you texture, you're going to be in a pretty good spot when it comes to setting up these textures and getting them in really fast and applying the mask changes really fast. And it's definitely a very good program for stuff like this. So I'm very happy with it, especially since it's like a $40 program, which is like nothing. But let's just adjust our mask settings here. I'm going to bring the tightness down by quite a bit and see if we can get some rust to pop up. Well, actually, there's probably another mask here for rust. Surface rust or smooth rust. I'm going to go with surface rust simply because it seems more, in the image, it seems a lot more dominant than the smooth rust, and I want this to be pretty rusty. So curvature I'm going to bring up because I want it to be focused a lot on our curvature mask. Contrast I'm going to bring up, and tightness down. Well, actually tightness up, sorry. I'm just going to play with this until I get something I like. Tightness is definitely one of the main things that's going to adjust how much is on there. Maybe curvature down a little bit. And we're just sort of playing with this until we can find a solid rust amount on here that we like. Texture, we can bring that up a little bit. And tightness up. Or maybe down. Like I said, a lot of this is just sort of playing with it until you find something you like. And of course, you're more than welcome to go in and paint in the information. So with that, it's really doing a pretty spot on job of understanding where the curves are and putting the rust at the front here. So that's not too bad there. I would probably go back and sort of adjust this a little bit more, but just because of the sake that this tutorial is going so long, and this is a very similar technique as to what I was showing previously, I think this does a pretty good job for now. I would probably go in actually, and I'll just do it really quickly, and just sort of paint out maybe some of this information here. Or maybe paint it in depending on the look you're trying to go for. But there's no point in having rust absolutely everywhere. But that can work for now. I would encourage changing that a little bit more and adjusting it. But to do so, you've already understood the steps. And I believe that you guys should probably be able to do it at this point, understanding if you got this far. Next, we're going to do the sticker. Shift C. We're going to click on the blue part first. And we're just going to use a plastic just to get sort of a basic look. Just a clean shine, more or less. And I guess any one of these will really do. I'm just going to sort of go for this blue one, just because it's close to the color I want anyways. And actually, I might just make the color red. I don't know. I was just going to make it blue, but I'm like, well, I might just add a bit of a splash of a different color in here, just because it is pretty uniform. And I think red would look nice up there anyways. So we might do that, and I got one with some dirt on it as well, just because the curvature map will map that to the edge of the sticker, so it kind of looks like it's, you know, it's been used, someone put it on, and I'll do a very good job of automatically doing that for us. And let's see here. Yep, so let's just adjust the color to maybe a red, and just see how we like that. I'm going to do like a burgundy maybe, actually. Something like that. Yep, that actually fits quite well. And if we look in, it does look scratched. It does have that normal information, so it's like a thin sticker being put on top, which is what we want. It has that edge wear all the way around, which is nice. And that's pretty much that. Then we can click on this text with Shift C once again. We're going to do plastic. We're going to do the exact same one. Except for this time we're going to delete a couple layers, and you'll see why in a second. simply because we do not need edge wear on the letters because it's a part of the same sticker. It wouldn't make sense unless it's like beveled out, which in this case it isn't, it's just a sticker. So we're going to get rid of some of the layers just because we literally just need the base color for this. It's more than enough, and then we just have these numbers down here and we're pretty much done, which is great. And then we can render it out and you can do whatever you want with it. So now we have that there. I'm going to change the color on that because that's kind of just looks terrible the way it is right now. The color, I'm just going to put it to like a bit of a cream. Kind of like how the license plate was by default. And we're going to delete everything that isn't just the plastic base. So I'm going to shift select every layer that isn't the plastic base, and we're just going to delete it. We simply just don't need them. We don't need edge wear on everything. So we just have the plastic there. And now what we can do is do our final one with Shift-C and select this tiny little text down here. And be careful not to select the sticker by accident. And we're just going to do the exact same thing we did with the previous one. There might be a way to just duplicate layers. And I know you can save your own presets. But there might be an easier way to do this. I'm just not 100% positive as far as this goes yet. I'm still pretty new to the program. I just thought this was a great exercise for people who are just trying to learn it. I thought, you know, a license plate is a great way to abuse the use of normal maps, and the materials aren't too crazy on it as well. So I thought this was a good idea to do something like this, and it turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the results overall, and it's definitely a quick way to get a good portfolio piece. I put this on my ArtStation. I think it turned out pretty good. I put a bit more time into mine than this one, but feel free to put as much detail into this as you want. This is more or less just an exercise to get you used to the program, in my opinion. And anyways, just like before, we're going to delete all these previous layers. Yep, we just don't need those as far as this goes. And that is essentially our license plate right there. Let's see. So that's pretty much it right there. That's the plate. If you want to, we can go over some basic post-processing. So force high quality viewport, high quality resampling, we want that on. Sharpness pre-pass. We'll get back to post-pass in a second because this is the sharpness before all the effects and this is the sharpness after the effects. We can put on some AO just to pop some of that stuff. Simulate a physical camera. We can put on some optical vignetting, turn that up a little bit. And chromatic aberration if you want some distortion around the edges. I like just a tiny bit. CC blooming, nothing too crazy. I'll turn the intensity down on that a little bit. And then the only other thing I like to add is just some lens stains, because it's kind of a dirty license plate, so some stains go a long way anyways. And then we can turn on the sharpness post-pass in just a very subtle amount. And then with that out of the way, and there's your license plate. You have all this detail up here. The edges look pretty crisp. We can center that, and then you can just hit render, and it's going to render it out for you. So that's how I would just set it up for a little, you know, demonstration to render it out, put on Twitter, put it wherever you want. And if you want to export your maps, you just got to click this little exporter. Select what your target is. For example, if you're exporting to Toolbag 2, Unity, Unreal Engine, whatever you want, V-Ray. And then essentially just set your path, export materials, and you're good to go. But that's it. That was a pretty long tutorial. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this though. A like on this video would go a long way. I just had a lot of fun using this program. It's brand new for me. I found this to be a very helpful little exercise to understand it a little bit more. So hopefully you guys did take something out of this. And for those of you who haven't actually used this program, first of all, it's kind of impressive that you made it this far into the video, but I highly recommend it. It's only like 40 bucks and it's a great alternative to Substance. I would never replace this program with it, but it does a great job for very specific things. Like for this, I would feel a lot more comfortable doing something of this style in this program than Substance. That being said, I need to learn a lot more about Substance before I can make these kind of claims, but either way, hopefully you guys took something out of this video. Like I said, if you did, like, comment, subscribe, really helps me out. Check out my Patreon if you want access to tutorials like these a little bit earlier than on my YouTube channel, but once again guys, thank you so much for watching. My name has been Tie-Dye, and I will catch you in the next video. See ya!